Wasn't expecting to hit so emotionally so quickly at the beginning. Just thinking about that, like I could not imagine what you went through. Can you just talk to me a little bit about that? If for no other reason than I'm going to control my emotions while you talk. So.
Sure. Yeah, Adam, it's interesting. I talk to a lot of people, a lot of dads, new dads, say, I can never go through what you went through. And I like to challenge that because God has made us very resilient. God has made us to want to have faith. And so our daughter was born on Christmas Day, a couple weeks early, but not too much. And no expected complications. She was our second child. So, we of course did all the screenings and all the tests and thought everything was going to be, work out perfectly. So it was born Christmas Day. We showed up at the hospital. We were stationed on Hawaii at the time, on Oahu. And immediately after she was born and I was able to cut the umbilical cord, the nurses rushed her out of the room. Lack of pulse and very shallow. If she was breathing at all, it was very shallow. And they put her in an incubator and started working on her. Well, there's only one NICU, neonatal intensive care unit on Oahu, and that's in Honolulu. So they had to rush her from the east side of the island where we were in Kailua over to Kapiolani Hospital. And there she was for 86 days. And they ran a full battery of tests. Every day was something new. Every day was something different. A new strategy, a new thing, a new discovery. Some days were high, some days were low. And it was interesting because we at no time knew really what was going on. Found out probably month 2 that there were only 2 cases in the world that were documented similar to hers. And in those 2 cases, both child died within 4 months. So that gave us, something to work off of. And ironically, when we were told that, our faith only increased. Unfortunately, her lungs, heart, and kidney all started failing at different points in her stay at the hospital. And on the 86th day, we had to say goodbye. And it was really interesting because the whole time she was at the hospital, my wife and I's faith continued to grow. It continued to, we just got bold. I mean, I told doctors that I was going to walk out of the hospital with my daughter. I told the Marines that I was working with, I was the maintenance officer at the helicopter squadron at the time. I told 150 of them that I was going to walk my daughter back into the squadron one day and they were going to get to meet her. So just bold words, bold actions. And when she passed away, it had some pretty devastating effects. My wife obviously took it the hardest, and she really had to dig deep and figure out what she truly believed. And we were both have been believers. We've both been raised in the church our whole lives. And it was really hard, and she had a really hard time going back to faith and going back into church and being in those circles. But I just told her, 2 things. One, I said, we lost our daughter. I'm not going to lose you. Mm-hmm. And the second thing was, that if we have to go back to the basics and we have to start all over, let's just focus on one thing. I love you. God loves us, and we're together. So let's start with, just working on that. And, it's been 8 years now, and I will say that she has made a drastic return back to her former self. And she's still on fire and still believes in healing and faith. And, it didn't happen to us, but that's okay. And that gives us a story to tell, to do this, right? To sit in front of each other and talk about how the struggle is real and how faith doesn't always pan out into the perfect scenario, but we still believe and we still keep going on. And so, so we took a pause and just kind of tried to reconstruct our family and our faith and who we were. And then we were blessed with a third child Hudson, who came a year and a half after Brooklyn. So now, like I said, we're a family of 4, and we're incredibly happy and incredibly excited to see our daughter in heaven one day.
Yeah, it of course hits me, I think, a little stronger since I have a little 5-month-old little girl hanging out over there, and I could not imagine. And it's one of those things that through, you never know, how you're going to react until something like that happens. And I'd love, obviously Faith had a huge impact for you in being able to work through that. And those types of trials and those types of tests, either, if we stay with it, our faith ends up being way stronger at the end of it than it was at the beginning. And I'm speaking as if I've ever lost a child, and I couldn't, and that's not the intent, but more just trials and tribulations as life life throws at us, right? And it's let me ask about your wife going through that, right? And you, how were you best able to support your wife through that? Especially like now she's not only obviously heartbroken about losing her daughter, but now obviously we're probably angry at God and what, like, for even allowing that type of thing to happen. Because it's one thing for us to have conversations that we just throw out in the ether as far as, like, how does God let tragedy happen? But it's another thing to look at and say, okay, but that tragedy is now right here. Like, it's not not this tragedy out there. But so can you, how did you best support your wife through that, or maybe how did you fail to support your wife through that you would love to do over if you could? It
was a time of a lot of learning. One, learning about communication, learning about the grieving process, learning about support. When there's an 83% chance families will separate when there's a death of a child. And one of the doctors told us that before we even left the hospital, before our daughter was even, had even
way to put that
away.
In my brain. Thanks, Doc.
Yeah. But so that tells me two things. One, there's a really small chance you can stay together, but there's a chance, right? The odds are against you, but man, if you are one of those people that say, you know what, I like those odds because somebody's making it. Let's figure out what they're doing. So I had to learn a couple things. One was communication. We obviously, men and women, communicate vastly different. And I had to quickly figure out that sometimes not saying anything, not having the answer, not being able to fix the problem, as most guys want to do, is okay in this scenario. Some of the best remembrances I have of us grieving together is me just arm around my wife, weeping together, because there's no words that you can say. And for guys, it's kind of weird that we think, well, I got to say something. I want to provide something, very philosophical that can fix this problem, but it can't. So sometimes just sitting in silence does the trick. Another thing that we had to really work through is the grieving process. And I like, I tell people, my wife and I both got to experience our daughter for 86 days on Earth. But for my wife, she had her in her belly for 9 months. That is a much longer relationship, a much harder thing to grieve. And my wife and I talk about losing, a child that's 22 years old or 30 years old. It's the longer you spend with them, obviously, the more attached you become. But my wife was very, very grieved, where I had 86 days. All 86 days were spent in the hospital, in a very isolated environment and very sterile. But the way I would grieve is I would take my surfboard or my stand-up paddleboard far out in the water. And out there, I would get angry. I would shed tears. I would beat the water and yell at God and try to figure out why this happened. And I would come home and I would be okay. My wife would be home with our 2-year-old son, grieving. I would be over it for the day, and she would be in the thick of it. So she couldn't see me grieving. And so for a while, it was a very hard thing to communicate because she never saw me grieve. So she thought I was okay with it or I was over it and I had moved on. Where in reality, we were just grieving two different ways. And so when it was a struggle to communicate that until I realized she just wanted to hear that I was having a tough day, or I thought about Brooklyn, or something reminded me of her, or I saw a girl, a 5-year-old girl that, man, that could have been our daughter, whatever. But the key was telling my wife, hey, this is what I'm dealing with today, instead of just thinking, I'm just going to keep it, submerged and not, I'll wait till it gets over. And so that was a big lesson for me.